Hello there, my name is Tuppence. I have got this lovely little pot. It's a Camellia pot and I got it from Temu. And because I did get it from Temu, it is much smaller than I anticipated. The lid itself is cute, but the pot, well, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to get in that. But I'm going to make this two different ways. I'm going to use some epoxy resin and then I'm going to use some Aqua cast or an eco resin. For this one, this is the epoxy version. I have got some mica powders. I've got light gold, royal orange and raspberry red. They're all from Arteza, and these are nail glitters, chunky hex nail glitters, which I also got from Temu. So first thing I want to do is to fill in the center of my Camellia. So I'm going to use the light gold for that. I've got a makeup brush. I'm just going to paint the mica directly onto the mould. Make sure that is all burnished in. I don't have any loose powder, and that's fine. Now hopefully that colour is going to show up despite whatever kind of colour I put behind it. And for the rest of this, I'm going to be using some of these glitters on the pot, and I want to try and stick them directly onto the silicone. I know when I get this on my mat, which is also silicone, it is a devil to get off. You literally have to use sticky tape to pull it off, and even then it still leaves bits behind. So I'm hoping that it's going to work in a similar way and it's going to stick to this silicone mould in the same way that it does on my mat, and then I'm going to have a nice even distribution along the outside. It should look really pretty, providing it remains on the silicone mould once I've poured that resin in. So I might as well dab the protective cover on there and get the glitter off of that. And it does seem to be sticking onto my mould. I'm also going to sprinkle a few bits on and just gently tap them in. And hopefully, as I say, once I put that resin in there, they're going to stay there. They may all fall off when I try and turn this mould back the other way, but they do seem to be sticking pretty well. So that was a kind of bluey colour, and I've also got this really pretty, it's almost like a rose gold, so I'm going to try that as well. Let me get that one open, and I can't peel these off at the best of times. That wasn't too bad. I really love the look of glitter, but I really hate the mess that it makes. It tends to go absolutely everywhere. And every time I've used it in resin, I don't know if it's because I use craft resin, which is a low viscosity one, but it always sinks. Even if I've put some Elmer's glue or I use a clear PVA glue, it just sinks and I end up with clumps at the bottom. So I'm really hoping that this is going to work and kind of give me the effect that I want. And actually, if it does work, I'm going to have used a lot less glitter than I would if I was putting it in the resin, because you do have to use quite a lot to get that to show up. And I'm going to be adding colour with those mica into my resin anyway, and so any glitter that I did put in there is just not going to really show up. So I'm pressing this down with my glove, and now I'm going to try and fold this mould back the right way round. Oop, got my finger stuck. Now I need to mix up my resin, and for this one I'm going to be using this resin from a company called Mouldd. So I've got the part A and B, and I'm going to start with my part B first, and I'm going to pour that into my mug. I'm going to show you the process of mixing it, which I don't usually do because there could be some new people here. So I'm putting in 1.5 ounces. It is a 1:1 ratio, so you need equal parts of both of them. Now some of that has clung to the side of the cup, and I'm going to wait for that to just run down and level out, just to make sure that I actually do get 1.5 ounces. And then I can top that up. And this is my first time using this resin, and it does appear to be a little bit thicker than the craft resin I'm used to. I need to add part A, again 1.5 ounces. That's going to give me a total of 3 ounces. Which I'm hoping is going to be enough, but I am guessing because I've never poured this mould before. Alright, now that I have them both in the same cup, I need to use the spatula to very carefully and slowly mix this around, scraping the bottom and the sides to make sure it's all incorporated. And I'm going to stir this for 4 minutes. The resin is all mixed, it's nice and clear, and I'm going to separate this into a couple of little cups because I want to create multiple colours. So I've got a couple of medicine cups which hold about 30 mils each, but I'm only putting about 5 mils in at the moment because I want to mix my powder in first. I'm going to add the light gold, and because I don't have the exact colour that I want, I'm going to add a little bit of the orange, and I'm trying to make a kind of apricot, or it's just a warm gold colour. So I'll put another blob in there, and then I'm going to mix this together before I add more resin. And that should mix in much easier. Stir all of that in, and this is going to be one of the colours that I'm going to use in the flower. I'm going to let that sit there for a minute. The bubbles should rise up to the top. So this is the raspberry red. Get off my finger. Again, I'm going to mix this powder in until it's all dissolved and there are no lumps, and then I can top that up with some more resin as well. So I've probably got about 40 or 45 mils of the colours. That's not going to be enough to fill that flower lid. I'm going to start by drizzling both of the colours in and swirling them around to create the colours around the bottom where the petals are, and I'll top it up with some of the clear. I'm going to scrape everything out of these cups, make sure that I use all of the resin that I have. And I really like the way that these colours are separating. They will blend a little bit as time goes on, but they're just looking so pretty at the moment. Okay, I just need to do a quick wipe up, and as you can see, this is not filled up yet, but I do want to give this a little bit of a squeeze and kind of bring up some of that resin so that it's coating the underside of that lip, and then hopefully when I add more resin to it, it's going to help the bubbles just to slide out a little bit easier. Alright, so I'm going to top it up with some of the clear and bring it up so that the level is just above that lip. Otherwise, when I try and squeeze some of the air out, it's just going to slide right back in again if the resin isn't high enough. So I'm going to use my stick to lift up the edge, and then I'll squeeze it with my fingers or my thumb and try and get those bubbles to pop out from underneath. It's pretty satisfying when they come up to the surface and pop. Oh, that's hurting my fingers. Oh, yeah, there we go. Look, you can see that bubble rising up. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to make sure that I get all of those out. It's going to mean a lot less work for me afterwards. Plop. You can see the bubbles rising up. I think that's pretty good now. So I'm just going to give that a quick swirl around and stop poking around so that I don't mix any more of those colours together. And I'm going to top it up the rest of the way with a little bit more of the clear resin. That's pretty good. So I'm just going to give that a little bit of a tap and hope that there aren't any bubbles trapped amongst all of those petals underneath. I'll set that aside. Okay, so I haven't got a lot of that left, so I'm going to definitely have to mix up some more. But before I do, I'm going to add some colour into this. Now I'm going to put the pink in, but before I do that, I want to use some of this, which is a kind of pinky purple cast Aurora Powder. So I'm just going to sprinkle some of that in there and give that a good mix in. And I'm going to add that raspberry red as well, but it's just going to shift the colour slightly so that we get some kind of difference between the bottom of the pot and the flower. And as I'm mixing that in, I think you can see it's got this really lovely kind of purple sheen to the surface. Really pretty. Alright, so I'm going to add a little bit of the raspberry red and make sure that's mixed in. It's going to give me a nice kind of pink, slightly milkshakey pink. Pretty. Alright, I'm just going to add that to the pot, and then I'm going to slightly squeeze the bottom make sure that there are no bubbles trapped along those edges. It is quite flat along that surface and it's pretty chunky too. Then I'll top this up with the rest of the resin. Okay, so I'm about halfway. That's okay because that will give me a chance to mix up some more resin. And then I think what I'm going to do is mimic the flower and create a two-tone pot. So just scrape the last of that out. And I'm going to go ahead and mix up some more resin to add. I've mixed up a bit more resin, and this time I'm going to add the light gold and a little bit of the orange, but I'll leave that Aurora powder out. I'll give it a quick mix to make sure it's all thoroughly blended. And then I can pour this on the top of the pot and fill it up. And hopefully I'm going to have a lovely blend between that pink and the gold, because it has been sitting for a little while before I added this. Alright, so despite scraping everything that I could out of the cup, I still didn't quite have enough. Some days I just underestimate how much I'm going to need. So I'm going to mix up 30 ml of clear resin and I'll add that, and I'll see you back here for demold. These are cured. I've taken them out of my G3 and you can see it's still a little bit soft, but they should be fine for demolding. So I'm going to start with the flower. I've got a little bit of a bubble there. I was hoping that was going to disappear, but it didn't. So let's see how else I did. Just pull this back. It's not the easiest one to demold, but it's not too bad. It's a pretty flexible mould. So just get that all pulled back from the edge. There we go. It's not too bad. I've got a little bubble along that edge. Right, let's fold that mould back in. Have a look here. Do I have any? Well, it's not too bad at all. I just got one little bit there. Otherwise, it looks really good, and I am loving that colour blend. That's really pretty. So let's have a look at the pot. Try and get that off. Just fold it all the way back. If you can roll most of it back, half of it back, then you're on a winner. And I can see I have got some of the glitter. It looks like it's all come off the mould, which is great. Twist that and just make sure that that goes back into shape. And I really like that. I think I would have liked a little bit more of a blend between the two colours. It's kind of a defined line, but I can see the glitter on the sides. It looks really lovely. Just pop those two together and that is pretty. I'm very happy with that. Right, I'm going to keep these apart until they are fully cured, otherwise the two pieces will stick together. So I'm now going to do an eco resin version, and I'm going to use Aqua cast. Well, I'm not really sure how much eco resin I need to mix it up because I didn't take note of how much I used in my pot and I had to keep adding resin to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix up 120 grams of my powder or thereabouts. And no matter how careful I try and be, I always get powder everywhere. So I'm just going to brush that off when I've finished, and then I'll go over this with a baby wipe. I've got 122 grams, so now I need my water. And the mix ratio for Aquacast is 35 grams of water to every 100 grams of powder, so I need roughly 42 grams. But I'm actually going to use a little bit more because I want this to be slightly more fluid so that it gets into all of the nooks and crannies of those petals in the flower lid. So I have my powder. Normally I would add the powder to my water, but because of the small pot that I have the water in, I'm just going to pour it into the powder pot and mix this up until there are no lumps. Okay, I think this is all mixed nicely. I've got kind of very runny pancake batter consistency because I've added slightly more water than I would normally need. Now if I tap this up and down on the table, hopefully any powder that I haven't mixed in will rise to the surface, as will some bubbles. I'm going to fill the flower first, so I'm going to put a little bit into the bottom. And then I'm going to tap that up and down and swirl that around so that it starts to fill in any of those nooks and crannies and the deep crevices of the petals. And that way I shouldn't have very many bubbles stuck, or any bubbles stuck in the bottom. So just make sure I twist that all the way around, and that leaves a very shallow coating, so the bubbles should rise up and pop, and I can just keep tapping this and filling it up, encouraging the bubbles to rise up. And again, like the resin, it is going to get stuck underneath that lip. So before I go any further, I'm going to start to pour my pot, and I'm going to fill that up about halfway, and the same process, bit of a squeeze along the bottom. We don't want any holes along that top edge. I've got a little bit of a lump on the back there, so I'm just going to squash that, but that'll be all right. It will still cure in there. So I'm just going to carry on and fill this up, and it looks like I might need to make up a little bit more. That's okay, that's super easy. I'm going to do the same as I did with the resin and just squeeze along the edge of this, getting the bubbles to release from underneath this lip. And they should come out with a satisfying pop. Although this one does not look like it wants to pop. Come on, out you come. I'll just pop it with my finger. Right, so I'm going to speed this up, I think, because you've seen me do this process before. I'm going to carry on popping some of these bubbles, and then I'm going to mix up some more aqua cast. It will take anywhere from about an hour and 20 minutes for these to cure up, and then I can demold them. And then they're going to need to dry before I can do any kind of varnishing or decorating. So I will pop them in my G3 curing machine, and I'll put that on at 140 for a couple of hours to help speed along that drying process. But before I do that, I've got a few little holes around the bottom of my pot, so I'm going to fix that. I've got a little bit of aqua cast in this medicine cup, and I'm adding a tiny bit of water and mixing that to create a paste. This is looking like toothpaste, so it's a much thicker consistency than I would use for pouring. And I'm going to use the silicone brush to smooth this over the surface and fill the hole, and then I'll just wipe it back with my finger. It's going to leave a little bit of a rough surface, but once this is dry, I can sand it all completely smooth. So I'm going to carry on and fill any holes that I find, and then I'm going to pop this into my G3, put it on 140 as I've said, and I'll come back in a couple of hours. It should be dry enough for me to sand that back, and then I'm going to leave it overnight. And I'll see you in the morning. Okay, it's all dry now, and I can add this. This is Gilding Wax, and this is by Pebeo. I've got a lovely gold colour. So I'm going to keep this quite elegant. I'm not adding any more colour than this to the Camellia, and the pot's going to stay white. I'm applying this with a sponge, and I'm just going to apply it to the highlights, the edges of the petals. It's kind of like shoe polish. You put it on while it's all creamy and waxy, you let it dry for a little while, and then you buff it off, and it will leave a really strong and durable colour behind. And I'm going to use a makeup brush to apply some to the middle, really gently and softly, so that it only picks up the highlights and just makes the texture stand out a little more. Once I've got all of this covered, I'm going to set this aside for about an hour, and then I'll just use a soft microfiber cloth to buff everything up and restore some of the shine. And the last thing I need to do is to apply several coats of varnish. This is an acrylic water-based varnish that I have diluted. So I've got 3 parts of the varnish, 1 part water, and I'm going to apply at least 3 coats of that, letting this dry in between. You start with the diluted varnish first, so that it actually soaks into your piece rather than just sitting on the surface. And then once that's all dry, I'll switch to the full strength version, and I'll do a couple of coats of that, and that will give me a super glossy shine and make this look like a piece of lovely ceramic. Before varnishing the lid, I'm using a soft cloth to make sure that the wax is all polished in. This is going to make it look super shiny, and then I can use a soft makeup brush to apply the varnish in very thin coats so that I don't end up with bits pooling in between the petals. And that is pretty much it. Let me know, do you like the eco version, the very simple gold and white, or do you like the colourful resin version? I'm going to leave you with some photos. If you would, could you please like, comment, subscribe if you haven't. It's free to you, really help my channel, and you'll be able to come back and see what I'm going to make next time. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye.